Chapter 9 of The Dry Dock of 1,000 Wrecks by Philip Elliott Roberts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9, Out of Nazareth. Can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? John 1, verse 46. Cherry Hill, once a pleasant spot in New York City where George Washington resided, is today a sordid Italian colony. It positively teems with life, part of which may be seen to continually overflow from the crowded tenements to doorstep and pavement. Foul smells and gentlemen of the pushcart fraternity abound, while unkempt women with arms akimbo chatter ceaselessly from open doorways. Children there are aplenty, and where they play about in the wretched paved thoroughfare puddles of fetid water are common, and an occasional cat lies bleaching in the sun. It is not an attractive or pleasant neighborhood, but, save for an occasional shooting affray arising out of some gambling squabble, is law-abiding enough, in occasions of police but little trouble. It was a very different story 30 years ago. In those days Cherry Hill earned for itself a sinister reputation even in the old Fourth Ward, an area in no way particular or squeamish. Strangers rarely ventured down there. Some that did neglected to return to their friends and were never seen or heard of again. The inhabitants were almost exclusively Irish, drunken, lawless, well-nigh ungovernable. Old Jerry Sullivan, who for many years kept a shoe-repairing store in Water Street, has told many a dark story of what happened in Cherry Hill in those bad old days. Jerry was a county Cork man, and maintained that for years the hill was under a ban. "'Twas a Saturday night, years ago," he said one day as he sat hammering away at a shoe, "when the hill had had a droppin' the devil was in 'em, and what wid the singin' and dancin', and every one rushin' up and down the hill yellin', why, you wouldn't b'lave the row. Then they began a cussin' and a fightin', and the blood began to flow, till some wan afeard old mother run for the priest, and sure the priest he come, and he talks to 'em and thritens 'em, but they wouldn't heed. So thin he walks the length of the straight, callin' on 'em to remember the judgment of the Almighty, but the devil's only laughin' and sworin' the harder. So the priest, God help us, when he got up top of the hill, he turns round and looks down, and he hears the men and the women, and the childer, and blasphemin' and cussin'." Jerry paused a moment and crossed himself. "Sure 'twas like listenin' at the gates of hell. Then the priest of God he stretches out his hand, and says he, 'May the curse of the Almighty be upon this hill, for 'twas the wickedest place on earth.' And bedad, the curse stuck to Cherry Hill till the Irish all cleared out." Somewhere about 40 years ago, when the neighborhood was at its worst, two lads were born into this welter of lawlessness and sin. Both grew up in vice and ignorance. Both subsequently led lives of superlative evil. Both are now Water Street converts. Both are rough-cut diamonds, but diamonds all the same. Although there is little, if any, difference in their ages, one man is uncle to the other. The uncle, known to his inmates as Lucky Baldwin, is Chris Jeff Balfe. The nephew, William H. Johnstone, who rejoices in the sobriquet of Bull. The testimony of each man is allowed to appear just as he himself has furnished it, in the belief that those who may read the following chapter may be the better able to realize what miracle of grace these two men are. Chris Balfe came to the mission in a dreadfully drunken condition, scarcely knowing what he was about, but God sobered and saved him. Here is his own story. "I was born on Cherry Hill about 37 years ago. I had a good father and mother, but God bless them, they cannot do anything with me. At that time this neighborhood was known all over the world because of the tough gang who lived around here, and I was one of them. I would not go to school or do anything else my parents wanted me to do. I was determined to have my own way and please myself. So of course I turned out to be a thief and a drunkard. I remember the Macaulay Mission years ago, and I, along with others, did all I could to annoy them, here by breaking windows, pulling out the board, and trying to break up the meetings. As far as I can remember, my first drunk was when I was about 11 years of age. I was standing in Cherry Street one day, with some boys about my own age, and across the street there was a brewery wagon, and the driver was bringing in kegs of beer into a store. He took about 25 small kegs off the wagon and laid them on the sidewalk for a man to come out and count them. After the bartender had done so, the driver started to roll them into the store, and when he had rolled in about 4 or 5, the thought came into my mind that I would like to roll one into the alley, which was next door. It was no sooner thought than done. I started right over to take one, and rolled it into the alley. When the driver got the rest of them in, he got up onto his wagon and drove away, never missing the one I had stolen. My pal and I started to cut and bust the bunghole of the keg. It broke, and as the foam flew up, I held my head over it and drank all I could. By this time a few of the other pals had gotten a can, and then we started in to do as we had seen the big fellows do. This is the first time that I remember of ever being drunk. In my drunken condition, my brother took me home. My mother laid me down on the sofa and waited for my father to come home from work. When he came, he told my mother that he would let her take charge of me. The next day, she sure did take charge of me, and standing me in the middle of the floor, gave me all that was coming to me, and a little that should have gone to my brother. But I got up that night and cleared out, and for 3 months my people never saw me. I went over to Jersey City and got on a barge at the Morris and Essex Canal, and went to Port Delaware. I came back from Delaware and went to Newark, New Jersey, with a thief. I stayed in Newark a month, then came back to New York. Now that was the commencement of my downward career. I then got in with the street gang and got to be leader. We used to steal boxes of groceries, tubs of butter, etc., from wagons and buy drinks with the money we received from selling the goods. Being now about 17 years old, I got tired of this sort of life and wanted to go to work. So I went to work at different things, trying everything, but could not bring myself to stay anywhere. I was arrested several times, but my poor old mother would always get me out, and I tried hard to reform. My father now took hold of me and tried to teach me a trade, but I would not stay with him and left. I roamed around in the streets a while, and then went to work driving a truck. This seemed to satisfy me for a time, but I spent more time in idleness than at work, hanging around the Fourth Ward. Getting tired of this, I turned my steps towards the Bowery, where for 20 long years I was lost to home, friends, and everyone that was dear, and there led a life that is almost indescribable. After leading this kind of life from New York to San Francisco, I came back one day to see the old Bowery, as it had always been home sweet home to me. I had made it my home for 20-odd years. I had spent all my money. Just a week before, I held a man up and took $30 from him, but that was all gone, and I was sick. I was talking to a fellow that day, and you can imagine my surprise when he asked me to go to the old McCauley Mission with him, as he wanted to get a cup of coffee. I looked at my shoes and then at his shins, but I was too weak and sick to do what was in my mind. I told him what I wanted was whiskey, not coffee. Thank God, he knew what I wanted better than I did. This man started for the mission, and I got up and followed him. Now, although I was born and raised around the neighborhood, I never knew they gave out coffee and sandwiches there in that mission. Some of my people were in business not far from the mission and were highly respected, but I never went to see them. I went in the mission that afternoon and got the coffee, and then came back again at night to the service. I was drunk, and the man who read the lesson was deaf, and had an ear instrument like a box which he placed on the desk. Seeing this, I said to a fellow near me, "Go up there and tell that guy to telephone to heaven that I am coming." I listened to the testimonies, and yet I did not believe them. It was not that I wanted to be bad, but I knew no better. However, when Mr. Wyburn asked all those to come forward who wanted to lead a better life, I was the first to start. When I knelt down to pray, I almost went to sleep on my knees. Mr. Wyburn came to me and asked me to pray. I said, "I don't know how to pray." He said, "Pray the prayer of the publican." I replied that I was no Republican. I was a Democrat. You see, I was so ignorant I did not know. Finally I did cry, "God be merciful to me a sinner, for Jesus' sake," and the tears began to flow. I had not shed a tear since I was a little child, but God melted my heart. He heard my prayer that night, and I have never wanted a drink of whiskey since. And better still, he has taken away all those sins that go with a drunkard's life, and enables me to live a true, honest Christian life. 5 or 6 weeks after my conversion, Mr. Thomas Savage Clay, a trustee of Water Street Mission, God bless him, took an interest in me and invited me to go with him and hear Dr. A.F. Schaffler talk to Sunday school teachers. I had never read the Bible up to this time, but I heard this man speak of the 3rd chapter of Acts. I went down to the mission and asked for a Bible, and had one of the converts find this chapter for me. I took the Bible and read every word of that chapter and understood it too. Now I can read any part of the Bible, and God helps me to understand what it means. Oh, how I wish I could impress upon people how real this new life is to me. It is wonderful that God could care enough for me to stoop down and pick me up out of the mire and the clay and place my feet upon the solid rock, Christ Jesus. God has blessed my testimony and used it to His honor and glory. For the past 3 summers I have had the pleasure of attending the students' conferences and also the general conferences of Christian workers at East Northfield, Massachusetts. I can never thank God enough for the spiritual blessings I have received there. I have also had the joy of giving my testimony up there to the saving and keeping of power of Jesus Christ. I shall never be able to thank God enough for having led me to the old Jerry McAuley Mission, 316 Water Street, where I found the way out of my trouble. It was there Jesus found me. He reached down and brought me up out of the miry clay and out of my degradation, and cemented my feet on the solid rock, there to stand for time and eternity. It was there I also first met the best friend I have on earth, Mr. T.S. Clay. He saw me struggling. Being a Christian, he commenced to help me bear my burden, and under God, he has been my friend ever since. God has raised up my friends for me. It was through Mr. Clay and Mr. Wyburn that I was sent to Northfield, and God blessed me there. Now I am studying at the Moody Bible Institute, Chicago, and God has by His Holy Spirit saved many a poor mother's boy in Chicago through my efforts. I have tested both sides of life, and found that the Christian life is the only one to lead, the only life in which man can have true satisfaction. Pray for me that I may remain steadfast to the end. Like uncle, like nephew. The same crass ignorance of early years, the same misguided youth and early manhood, the same vicious living out of maturer years, and both have found pardon, restoration, and peace at the same precious cross-foot. Chrisboff has told his story, and here is Bull Johnstone's. I was born on Cherry Hill, right behind the McAuley Mission. On the day I first saw daylight, the whole neighborhood was up in arms. It was Orangeman's Day, and the Irish were all fighting like mad, so I've been told. The bringing up I got was the sort that most other lads got there in those days, being left to yourself to do as you liked. I never thought of God for a minute, and religion never entered my mind. I grew up a big, husky sort of fellow, good-natured and easy-going. There were 2 things that, from the days when I was quite a little chap, I made up my mind to be a gambler and a professional ball player. And I made good, or made bad, whichever you like to call it, at both. And that caused me to start in with the booze quite early. Soft drinks didn't cut any ice with me. I thought I had to stand up at the bar and drink whiskey to be a sport, and before I was 20 years of age, I could swallow it down to beat the band. I never sidestepped anything in the way of liquor in those days. As I've already said, I was a strong, healthy fellow, and getting a jag on didn't trouble me a bit. I was always fit next morning, and ready for hitting it up again. Well, I kept on going round with a bunch, and that soon queered my ball playing. The manager told me this was a ball team, not a distillery, and that he hadn't any notion of carrying a booze fighter around with him. So whiskey put me out of business as a player. After I quit as a member of a team, I took up umpiring. That is, in the summer. In the winter I lived by gambling. I picked up a tidy chunk of easy money in my time, being always on the lookout for lemons. When I laid hold of one, I cleaned him up pretty good. Now as I look back on such mean, miserable ways of getting along as I had, it makes my face burn with shame. Well, the game couldn't go on forever. 15 years of the sort of life I led had to show somewhere, although I never bargained for it at the time. And when the blow came, it hit me pretty hard. I contracted some sort of complaint that settled in my joints and made me a cripple. I'd struck a hoodoo for fair. No dough, friends gone, health bad, completely down and out. But I managed to keep on getting whiskey. I thought perhaps it would cure me. A fellow can always get that, worse luck, one way or another. But I led a miserable life for years. Then about 2.5 years ago I came back to New York. I was certainly all in, and didn't care much whether I lived or died. I went to stay for a while with an aunt over in Brooklyn, but soon she got tired of having me around, as was only likely. So she told me to get a hustle on and look around for a job. I couldn't work, so I went to inquire after an uncle of mine named Chris Balfe. Lucky Baldwin he was best known as, and I was told he was to be found at the McCauley Mission. You could have knocked me down with a feather when I heard that. Lucky was at a mission? Well, that beat cockfighting. A saloon or a gambling joint had always been more in his line. Well, I went after him. I didn't care where I found him so long as I could separate him from $1. The night I went to the mission hall, Uncle was not present. I was invited to stay, and as I'd never seen or heard anything like it, I consented. I want to tell you frankly that I thought the whole outfit was a fraud. The boys who testified I put down in my own mind as 4 flushers. You see, I was such a crooked, no-good sort of guy myself, I thought everybody else was as bad. I never gave it a thought that these men were on the level, so thinking I'd got a line on the whole bunch, I went away. But I couldn't rest. The wonderful stories I heard kept popping up in my mind. Could they be true, I wondered? And if they were, what about my chances? As far as I remember now, that was the way I began to try to figure things out. Well, I went back to the mission, this time to listen and take notice. The testimonies I heard had the right ring about them. I found out in 10 minutes that I'd doped 'em out wrong the last journey. God spoke to me through those men. Thick, ignorant, sinful as I was, I felt my need of His help and pardon. I limped up to the mercy seat and gave my heart and life to Jesus Christ. What He has done for me since that happy hour I cannot begin to tell. First of all, my ailment has had proper attention so that, with all the rotten booze cut out, I'm a pretty good healthy fellow again. Yet, after all, that's nothing in a way of speaking. Think of the way He has cleaned up my life, of the way in which I'm able to resist temptation and remain true right among the old gang. I know I can't tell the story as I ought. Cherry Hill's to blame for that. But I know, thank God, what I feel, what I know. I'm saved, kept, and blessed every hour of my life by the power and love of God. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? So ran the ancient query, and the answer was a transcendent affirmative, involving the salvation of the race. And out of Cherry Hill, a place with as infamous a reputation as that which clung to the hillside city of Galilee, have come 2 magnificent trophies of the power of pardoning grace. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of The Dry Dock of 1,000 Wrecks by Philip Elliot Roberts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10, Blossoming Desert. And the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. Isaiah 36, verse 1. One striking evidence of Rudyard Kipling's wide appeal is that, whenever a half-dozen men begin to discuss him, almost invariably each man will voice his preference for a different story. One will declare for without benefit of clergy, another for they. A third will swear by love of women, a fourth by the gate of 100 sorrows, or the man who would be king. So it goes, each to his fancy. I am reminded of the final story in Plain's Tales, to be filled for reference. Almost everybody will recall that masterly study of an English varsity man gone utterly to the dogs in India. To be sure, it is only a half-filled sketch, a little better than a fragment. Therein lies its power. I have known, intimately, half a dozen men who might well have sat to Kipling for his Mackintosh Jellaludin. Men whose tragic stories spring vividly to remembrance when I read such passages as these. He was, when sober, a scholar and a gentleman. When drunk, he was rather more of the first than the second. He used to get drunk about once a week for 2 days. On these occasions he raved in all tongues except his own. One day he began reciting Atalanta in Calydon, and went through it to the end, beating time to the swing of the verse with a bedstead leg. "Man," said he, "when you have reached the utter depths of degradation, little incidents which would vex the higher life are to you of no consequence. Last night my soul was among the gods, but I make no doubt that my body was writhing down here in the garbage. I am as the gods, knowing good and evil, but untouched by either. On the soul which I have lost, and on the conscience which I have killed, I tell you that I cannot feel. I who am the son of a man with whom you have no concern. I who was once a fellow of a college, whose butter hats you have not seen." His voice stopped for 10 or 12 breaths, and then began, mumbling a prayer of some kind in Greek. The native woman cried very bitterly. Lastly he rose in bed and said, as loudly as slowly, "Not guilty, my lord." Perhaps his last sentence in life told what Mackintosh had once gone through. Then he fell back and the stupor held him till he died. The story of one such is set down here. The man was a New York bum, one of the tragic units that go to make up the underworld of the Bowery, the bread line and 10-cent flop. At the lodging house to which, when he had the price, he extended his patronage, he passed for something of a mystery. None of his fellow lodgers knew anything of his personal history, and the man himself never volunteered to meet the deficiency. Concerning his past he was as close as a clam. Not even when thawed, and rendered more communicative by Nick Solomon's third rail whiskey, did he ever abandon his reserve sufficiently to discuss his antecedents, or impart any information as to whom or what he had been, before he blew down to the Bowery and Mulberry Bend. So it came about that the absence of reliable data, coupled with the fact that their mysterious associate was obviously English, well-educated, and, when sober, well-mannered, disposed the boys of the lodging night house to endorse the conclusions of Brady, the night clerk, that he'd bet anybody $10 the fellow was one of them sky-hitting college guys, gone on the bum. Mr. Brady's diagnosis of his taciturn lodger's social status was perfectly correct. He was a college guy, and one gone, most assuredly, on the bum. Times there were, however, in circles far away from the Bowery, when the seal of silence would be lifted, and the story of a hideous past retailed for all it was worth, pry open the pocketbook of a sympathetic listener. In out-of-the-way corners of the city, where men whose limbs were made in England aren't wont to foregather, he would upload the sordid recital which foreran a touch. When he chanced a newcomer he would open up with his usual formula. "Pardon me," he would say, "but I fancy you're an Oxford man. Ah, thought so. Never rubs off, you know. Balliol, eh? I'm Magdalen." Then would follow talk of Jowett and Christchurch Meadows, of Bishop Stubbs and Guy Nichols, of Henry and Putney, of the 1,001 things dear to, and never forgotten by, men on whom the spell of the fair city of Oxford has been laid. Then would come the shameful story of shattered years. Almost invariably he would get what he asked for. Then back to a Bowery gin mill to drink up the proceeds of his panhandling crusade, and fall, almost insensible, into his wretched hammock mumbling, "God for Harry, England for St. George." Yet this man in other respects has utterly fallen as Mackintosh Jellaludin has, through the goodness and mercy of God, been saved that outcast's fearful end. And the story he was once careful to screen from all save those to whom he chose to tell it, he has now given broadcast to the world. From many a pulpit and platform in this fair land he has told it, impelled by the same motive as with which he has allowed it to be set down here, to the honor and glory of God. Richard Hugh Roberts was born an English gentleman. A luxurious home, godly parents, refined surroundings, and an unsullied name was part of the heritage into which, at birth, he entered. He was put to school at Lismore College, Ireland, the principal of which being a family friend. His early desires, as well as those of his mother, were to enter the English Church, and with that view he proceeded to a great university. When the time came to decide, however, he elected to prefer another profession, and entered the service of his Queen. "Never," says he, "shall I forget bidding my dear old mother good-bye. How faithfully I promised to preserve the honour of the old name, to abstain from every act unworthy of a gentleman, to never drink. Yet I had barely left home before I began taking my glass of beer, then brandies and soda, and pegs of whiskey. Almost before I was aware of it, I was living the life of a man about town, and right in the clutches of strong drink. To the dissipations of London I added the revelries of Naples, Paris, Marseilles. Standing on life's threshold, equipped with everything the heart could reasonably desire, social position, financial resources, magnificent physique, this young Englishman deliberately chose the downward road. Fashionable drinking clubs, stage doors, and green rooms claimed him for their own. Some of his friends, knowing of the headlong pace at which he was travelling along the road to ruin, said with a foolishness as fatuous as it is common, " He's only sowing his wild oats. He'll settle down after a while." He did settle down, but it was into a quagmire of iniquity from which, in his own strength, there was to be no escape. Not a word of his mode of living reached his mother's ears, and she, in her blissful ignorance, ever thought of her boy as one who fought the good fight. Then came India. When a white man begins to sink in the great Eastern Peninsula and is not sent home by his friends as soon as may be, he is as good as done for. The dunghill is almost certain to get him. Roberts was not sent home until it was too late. Now thoroughly alarmed, his friends strove to help him, but in vain. Everything that medical science could suggest was tried. A celebrated specialist advised a long sea voyage, a trip around the world. It availed nothing. Treatment in Australian, French, German, and English sanitariums were resorted to, but with the same result. A return to India plunged him to a deeper depth of depravity than before. In Bombay he was confined in a padded cell and later operated upon for abscess of the liver brought on by acute alcoholism. By this time the drink fiend had gotten him, body and soul. A few years had sufficed to change a man of parts and promise into a hopeless, nerveless dipsomaniac. With his fortune and commission gone, he returned to England. His father and then his mother died, their death hastened by the knowledge of their son's failure and life of shame. One by one his friends turned from him, wearied out in their bootless efforts to effect his reformation. Finally, a wealthy cousin sent him to Canada. At first he did not so badly there. Then the old appetite asserted itself, and he became a common vagrant, pestering the English community for assistance and sleeping on the docks and in lumber yards. One day he met a man who became interested in him and paid his fare to New York. Here he continued to lead the life of a homeless outcast. Now and again he would tackle a job addressing envelopes, carrying signs in the gutter, or washing dishes, simply in order to buy liquor. Suffering from delirium tremens, he was at one time or another an inmate of every alcoholic ward in Manhattan and Brooklyn. Winter after winter, for 10 long years, he stood shivering on Fleischmann's bread line, thankful to be given a crust of bread. Thus he drifted along, having reached the point where a man gives up the struggle and cries in utter hopelessness. Here, judge of hell with all its power to damn, can add one curse to the foul thing I am. For 4 consecutive nights previous to June 7, 1909, he slept on the floor of a cellar of Nick Solomon's saloon on Mulberry Street. Kicked out from there, he staggered to the park at 5 Points, and sat huddled upon one of the benches. Here he accosted 2 men and tried to panhandle them for the price of a drink. They refused him, and one of them said, "You'd better beat it down to Jerry McCauley's mission on Water Street. They're looking for guys like you." The word stuck to him. Next night, half drunk and on the verge of delirium, he made his way down to Water Street. He was given a seat near the door, and there fell asleep. Presently he woke to find the company singing a hymn that had a familiar sound. He knew that hymn. It was one his mother used to sing to him in happy childhood years. Sweetly the words rang out, "I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and His glory, of Jesus and His love." And as the outcast listened, he began to think of his weary wanderings into a life where the air was heavy and accursed, where the river of regret flowed through a flowerless land. He thought of how the world, that once had beckoned him to the banquet and offered smilingly the reddened chalice, now gave him only husks, the portion of a castaway. The singing of another hymn recalled him from his bitter broodings. Another of his mother's favorites, "Nearer, my God, to Thee," the one she loved best of all. How the tender words pierced the heart of the outcast. "Though like a wanderer, the sun gone down, darkest be over, my rest a stone." Over him surged a great yearning to return. He thought again of the sweetness of an earlier time, the rest and peace of other days. Yet return was not easy. His soul had grown callous with the passing of the sinful years. His mother's voice kept calling as the mission folk sang. "Still all my song shall be, nearer my God to Thee, nearer to Thee." At last he struck the homeward trail. Up to the praying bench he staggered, and flung himself at the foot of the cross. He lifted his heart to his mother's Christ. The heart that met him had no upbraidings, and the wanderer realized that the love with which he had been watched and pitied was interwoven with and akin to that of his mother's. He prayed the prayer of deep contrition, and, instantly, the joy of pardon flooded his soul. Richard Hugh Roberts was born again. What medical science, the entreaties and help of friends, or the galling defeats of 20 years had failed to accomplish, the saving power of God effected in the twinkling of an eye. Once sin-stained and leprous, the man now cleansed felt his flesh come again to him like that of a little child. Once again life grew sacred and joyous. In his soul a great reverence of purity and righteousness sprang up. The night died down. The scent of the morning filled the air. Across the horizon of his darkened life came a glimmer of the dawn. Soon for him the rising sun burned along the levels of the sea, while bracing winds ran east and west, blowing the clarions of the day. But unto you that fear my name shall the Sun of Righteousness arise, with the healing in his wings. Roberts made the quickest recovery ever known in Water Street. In less than 2 weeks from the day of his conversion, he attained a position of trust and responsibility. In the course of a few months he was finding employment for a half-dozen other converts of the mission. Today he is the trustee and valued representative of a great corporation in a territory over which he has entire charge. There is an old saying in England that blood will tell. Unfortunately, one never knows that it will tell until it begins to speak. In this case it has said the thing, and with no uncertain voice. Today, after years of bitter forfeit, Richard Roberts once more bears, without abuse, the grand old name of gentleman. To his intimates he is the soul of chivalry, to the world a man of honor, to the fallen a faithful friend. More than all this, he is a faithful witness for Jesus Christ, and a glorious trophy of the saving power of the crucified and risen Son of God. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of The Dry Dock of 1,000 Wrecks by Philip Elliot Roberts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11 by a Great Deliverance. And the Lord saved by a great deliverance. 1 Corinthians 2, verse 14. Edwin C. Mercer was brought to God in Water Street, August 1904. The story of his ruin and restoration is here set down in his own words. I want to anticipate this wonderful testimony by the statement that since September 1907, he has been at work among the students of the colleges and universities of America. In fully 75% of them has our friend labored during the past 5 years. A college man himself, he is a persona grata with students everywhere, and his labors have been abundantly owned by God. A report dealing with Mr. Mercer's work has been published recently and contains the following statement. All the large student centers from coast to coast have been visited by Mr. Mercer, with results that have been remarkable. Probably no man in the country is more acceptable in the fraternity houses and athletic circles of the colleges than Mercer, and the demands for his services far exceed the possibilities of his fulfilling any but the most important. The 3rd year of his work has been far the most successful of his 3 years in the field, and the committee is deeply gratified at the results achieved. Mr. Mercer's story ought to be heard or read by every young collegeman in the country. The sad experience of this bright young Virginian may very easily be duplicated 1,000 times. The pitfalls into which he fell yawn as widely as of yore. The devil is as keenly afoot for the mauling and marring of promising young lives as he ever was. It is with the hope that valuable careers may be conserved, and young lives saved from utter shame and ruin, that Mr. Mercer's testimony finds place in this book. The man who has never in his life taken a drink of alcohol cannot well appreciate the wonderful blessings enjoyed by deliverance therefrom. While on the other hand, the man who has been chained literally by its appetite, and made a demon to its craving, who has sacrificed everything worth living for to appease his yearning for the greatest curse that this world knows, can alone fully value and appreciate the great happiness which springs from a knowledge of the fact that the old shackles are broken, the craving been taken away, and the precious blood of Jesus applied to the heart. Having been for a number of years addicted to the use of alcohol and chained to its destructive appetite, and in addition an abject slave to the many sins which invariably accompany a drunkard's life, I can today lift my heart in grateful thanksgiving to God, who forgave me my sins and washed me in His precious blood, August 6th, 1904. That day I became a new creature in Christ Jesus. We cannot well deny the power of heredity, nor the consequent fact that the taste for alcohol is born in some men's lives. The great majority of drunkards, however, cultivate rather than inherit the taste for strong drink. In my humble judgment, it is very seldom the case that the desire to drink alcohol is a natural impulse, but rather one disastrously cultivated through the desire to be a good fellow, to be popular, and considered big and manly. The taste for strong drink in my case was not an inherited one, for none of my ancestors, unless very remote, were drinking people. My first drink was taken at college, and taken not because I really wanted it, for its taste was at the time most repugnant and repulsive to me, but simply because the men I started to associate with were drinking men. I feared the cruel taunts which I knew would result if I made a determined stand as a total abstainer. I was not able to muster the spunk to withstand the jeer of being effeminate or a sissy. The plea of my friends was that every young man had to learn such experiences and sow his wild oats some time in life. Would that I had then possessed the determination of a Daniel, who purposed in his heart he would not defile himself, but I did not. I little realized then that in sacrificing my principles for the fear of unjust criticism, I was right there forming habits which, as time advanced, were to merge themselves into a power which would control and later wreck and ruin my life. Sow an act, you reap a habit. Sow a habit, you reap a character. Sow a character, you reap a destiny. An old and familiar quotation this, the truth of which no man knows better than I. The very drink which was at first repulsive to me afterwards became my bread and meat. My God, what would I not do for it? Even pawning my clothes, my ring, my watch, my very soul itself. How little I thought, on taking my first drink for sociability's sake, that alcohol would one day master me body and soul. Even before leaving the University of Virginia, I had enough sense to know that business men, even though not professed Christians, were bitterly opposed to their employees drinking. So I resolved at the expiration of my college career to give up the bottle when I returned to my native city in the South for that reason, if for no other. But you will seldom find that men carry out such good intentions as these, and that, as a rule, when once the habit of drinking is formed, it is generally carried through life. I did not give it up when I returned home, but on the contrary drank more than I ever did at college. Then again, I was the very last one to see, the drunkard always is, that my moral character was gradually slipping away from me, that my tastes were degenerating, that my friends were becoming anxious about me, and that the hearts of my dear ones were bleeding for me. I was reasoned with, but would not listen. Drink deafens a man to that, and my sole thought and ambition was the social glass. Soon I began to desire, as my companions, the gambling element and the preference to Christian friends, and the racetrack was far more pleasing to me than the parlor and pure womanhood. The club and the saloon more attractive than the home of my parents. My father, brothers, and sisters pleaded with me to forsake the life I was leading, which they plainly saw would ultimately end in ruin, morally, mentally, physically, socially, and spiritually. My wife begged me to mend my ways, but all to no avail. The taste for the damnable stuff had me tightly chained, and no one then told me that Jesus was the only one to break those fetters. I made resolutions, sincerely enough, but with willpower totally gone, would break them 15 minutes after they were made. I wanted to do right. I began to see the terrible dilemma in which myself, my wife, and my dear family were placed, and I struggled in my own weak strength to break away from my evil companions and the drink which was killing me. But I might as well have tried to dam up the Atlantic Ocean. Finally the time came when my disgrace to family, wife, and self became so pronounced that I was strongly advised to leave my hometown, strive to change my life of living, and commence life all over again. I went to a city about 700 miles from my home, and in 2 months I secured a very good position. But I had carried with me to my new home the old appetites and passions, and instead of forming, as I had promised myself I would, a circle of helpful friends, I sought out barroom associates, club companions, and the racetrack element. I cannot blame my employer for discharging me, after I had worked for him for about a year. He had warned me against the drink and given me a fair chance, so that it was my own folly which caused me to lose my position. I had sent my wife home a short time before this, because I had foreseen the end and desired to spare her a little the misery of my wrecked life. There I was in a practically strange city, 700 miles from home, without employment, without money, without friends, and well in debt. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. I had sown, and now I was reaping good and hard. I had borrowed from a drinking companion enough money to purchase a railroad ticket as far as Trenton, New Jersey. And to that city I went seeking employment but finding none. Just outside the city of Trenton is a monument to my great-great-grandfather, General Hugh Mercer, of Revolutionary fame, and there I was, pondering over the 14th verse of the 15th chapter of St. Luke. There arose a mighty famine in that country, and he began to be in want. I was in want, not having a cent to my name, and for 2 nights forced through dire poverty to sleep on the benches in the square about the Capitol. One morning I was standing in front of the Western Union Telegraph office, hungry, tired, dirty, and almost hopeless, when an unknown party came up to me and calling me by name said, "You seem to be in trouble. What is the matter?" It seems this man had met me some months before in a hotel in the town I last worked in, and he claimed that I had been kind to him there and desired to reciprocate. He advised me to go to New York City and kindly paid my fare. I reached New York City in July 1904. My old college chums living in New York had been warned against helping me, and they made it plain to me that they did not want me hanging around their offices. These were the fellows I learned to drink with, to know through them the taste of which that had ruined me. My brother was in Europe, and things looked very blue and discouraging for me. I hardly knew what to do or where to turn. I had a Christian cousin at Wall Street, but as I had deceived him in some money matters a few months before, I was ashamed to face him and have to admit to him my guilt. This gentleman was Mr. Thomas S. Clay, himself an honored trustee of the Water Street Mission. I would have stayed away from him if it had been possible, but I had exhausted all the resources, and he was my last chance. I now thank God that I sought out this cousin, for he was not only willing to forgive me for my past wronging of him, but spoke very kindly to me and helped me financially. He also directed me to the dear Water Street Mission, telling me that if I would go there, I would be helped. At this wonderful mission, I heard for the first time that the blood of Jesus Christ could save a drunkard, and that was the only sure way a drunkard could be cured and saved. I attended a meeting and conferred with Mr. John H. Wyburn, and from the testimony I listened to that night, and from the counsel given me by Mr. Wyburn, hope began for the first time in many years to spring up within me. At last I saw a possible chance for me. The testimonies of the redeemed men impressed me wonderfully, and as I noted their happy smiling faces stamped with the very spirit of the living Christ, saw them handsomely clothed, and heard them telling gladly for Jesus' sake their stories of redemption, my heart began to beat faster, and I longed to be like they were. When the invitation was given to all who really desired to change their way of living and surrender their all to Jesus, I accepted the chance and went forward to the mourner's bench. I did so with full determination to surrender my life to Him who died for me. I was asked to pray for myself. Yet although 7 years previously I was a Sunday school teacher in my home church, I found myself unable to utter even the simplest kind of prayer. Somebody or other asked me to repeat after them the publican's prayer, "God be merciful to me, a sinner," which I did. When I arose to my feet I felt better, and while I could not explain what had taken place in my life, yet I was conscious of the fact that some great event had happened. Thank God, as I write this testimony of my life, I now know what the event was. Jesus Christ had come into my life, and thank God He has been living and reigning there ever since. Oh, what a wonderful Savior, how patient, how willing to forgive and forget, how anxious to help, how zealous to keep. I never knew what genuine happiness was until I began in a humble way to serve Him who died on Calvary to save a lost, sinful world. I now know, thank God, that the world and the things of the world can never truly satisfy, but that a surrendered life to the will and wish of Him who saves and keeps not only satisfies, but is beyond all comparison the happiest and the best. For the past 4 years my life has been spent among the young men of our American universities, colleges, and preparatory schools. I am trying to preach to these men a preventative message of God's power to save them from the depths of hell, which I sounded through dissipation and sin. Mine is a wonderful field. Among the 200 to 300,000 young men who so greatly need Jesus Christ at the center of their lives. When you realize that the college men of today are to become the leaders in civic and national life of tomorrow, then you can begin to appreciate the significance of my work. God has privileged me to give my life story at 75% of the universities and colleges of America, to address some 80,000 young men, to meet personally in club and fraternity houses, at training tables and on the campus of about 35,000 college men, to have personal interviews on vital topics with some 8,000 young men, and to have in my evangelistic meetings about 4,000 take a definite stand for the Christian life. This gives some faint idea of the definite side of the work. And yet who can measure the unconscious influence and good which we never hear about? I am just about to enter my 4th year of work among the college men of America, and I seek the earnest prayers of all my friends and all Christians who read this brief chapter. It promises to be the most important and hardest year I have yet had in the work. I have every day of the coming year taken up, and my committee are now picking and choosing the most needy places for me to labor in. Those in charge of my work have in hand enough invitations to keep me busy day and night for the next 3 years. Contrast this blessed service with the awful life I once led, and you will see that I have a right to claim that. The Lord has saved me by a great deliverance. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of The Dry Dock of 1,000 Wrecks by Philip Elliot Roberts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12, Lifted Bondage. The Lord shall give thee rest from thy sorrow, and from thy fear, and from thy hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve. Isaiah 14, verse 3. Whenever I visit Water Street, said a prominent business man one night in the Mission, I always experience considerable difficulty in bringing myself to even a faint realization of what these converts were 2, 3, or 5 years ago. Look at them, he went on, indicating 2 or 3 score of men, with a sweep of his arm. Doesn't it seem incredible that these splendid fellows were once drunkards and Bowery bums? It does, was replied. But then, surely the transforming power of God counts for something. Yes, yes, I know, was the rejoinder. There, of course, is the secret. Yet even when that, and every other contributing influence, has been reckoned in, the marvelous transformation effected in McAuley Mission men constitutes one of the standing wonders of the city. There is nothing hyperbolic about this pronouncement. Clean-cut, alert, courteous, in many cases evidencing culture and refinement, these Water Street converts exert an influence which renders it positively difficult to think of them as having been anything other than they are today. And none of this can be affirmed with greater truth and aptness than of Howard Thompson. If one did not know, he would never suspect this man's bitter past. There is no outward clue. He has been, however, as far away from God as most men. But today he is at home in the Father's house. He has a splendid stock and family. Yet in spite of the fact that the influences surrounding his early years in a beautiful western city were calculated to develop the best that was in him, he very early in life rebelled against God, and until a little over 5 years ago lived his life without spiritual help of any kind. In fact, without believing that any such help existed. In his own family there was abundant evidence of the contrary, but he chose to ignore it, and for his choice he has dearly paid. Now that I look back into the past, he said to me one day, I can scarcely remember any portion of it when I was not in either physical or mental misery brought on by vicious and selfish indulgence. For me it has been pay as you go. Finally, these evil practices brought him to the most unhappy condition to which any man can be brought in his life, that of being bound by habits over which he had no control, with which even medical science was entirely unable to cope. Chief among them was the love of liquor, against the inroads in which he struggled vainly for many years. He underwent several courses of treatment, and entered sanitariums to take most of the well-known cures. None of these proved effectual, and were helped to failure by another pernicious habit, that of inordinate cigarette smoking. For more than 15 years he had smoked incessantly, right through the day, and often a good part of the night. His nervous system became all but shattered from these excesses, and he resorted to drugs. This last, he says, just about clinched the business of my ruin. In spite of the entreaties of my friends, the claims of my children, and the appeal of 100 other reasons, I continued in my evil courses until I became utterly helpless. I was unable to work, and although still a young man, became a burden on my family. And the thought of my sheer helplessness, the sense of my total defeat, embittered me against everything and everybody. I was a hopeless, fettered slave. On May 30th, 1906, he was taken to St. Vincent's Hospital in what was thought to be a dying condition. Under careful treatment, however, he slowly recovered. While still in the hospital, he was visited by a member of the Brotherhood of St. Andrew, who came at the instance of a man who knew Mr. Thompson and had often helped him. This good brother sent him, when convalescent, to the New York Christian Home for Intemperate Men at Mount Vernon. It was while in that admirable institution that he heard the news of a deliverer who could free him from his awful bondage. To one of the religious services came E.C. Mercer, telling the story of the Savior he had found in Water Street, and of the glorious change that had been effected in his life. The story gripped Mr. Thompson as nothing had done before. Somehow he had not realized hitherto that the root cause of all his misery was sin and rebellion against God. But that afternoon he saw it with startling clearness. After leaving Mount Vernon, he made his way down to Water Street, determined to learn more of this wonderful way of escape. Many such stories as that which he had heard Mercer tell at Mount Vernon were given that night. The evidence was overwhelming. In the after-meeting, Mr. Thompson, with a score of other men, went forward to the penitent form, and on his bended knees promised God that with his help he would begin to fight the good fight. That was more than 5 years ago, and he is still in the ranks of the King's army. The Lord has wonderfully blessed Howard Thompson during the passing of these years. He has given him joy and peace. He has given him the strength to live decently, honestly, uprightly. He has put a new song into his mouth and established his going. He has enabled him to secure and hold a responsible position with an excellent business concern, a corporation of which today he is secretary. He has given him means wherewithal not only to support those dependent upon him, but to pay off the debts contracted in less happier days. Respected and loved by all who know him, he is, today, entirely freed from the foul habits which once securely held him, and is being signally used of God. He never loses an opportunity to tell old and young that the secret of all moral victory and well-being lies in putting one's trust in Jesus Christ. His great, clear, definite affirmation is that God never loses sight of them that put their confidence in Him. The Master Potter has put His hand on this once marred piece of human clay, and is now shaping it into a vessel of usefulness and honor in His service. To what purpose is the waste, is sometimes the cry of men and women as they behold efforts made to reclaim the lost. Howard Thompson is a magnificent vindication and a prophecy of greater things to come. For the encouragement of those who may be praying for dear ones, he sometimes says in his testimony, "I would say, never give up, no matter how hopeless the case may seem. I am convinced that it was in answer to the prayers of my family, especially the unfaltering love and faith of a dear sister, that I was finally led to deliverance in Jesus Christ." End of chapter 12. Chapter number 13 of The Dry Dock of 1,000 Wrecks by Philip Elliot Roberts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 13, The Second Spring. Lo, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth, the time of singing of birds is come. Solomon's Song 2, verses 11 and 12. Water Street has been blessedly used of God, not only to lift men from the depths of spiritual ignorance and lifelong rebellion, but in bringing back those who have played the apostate, who, for some mess of licentious pottage, have bartered away their birthright. Many such have begun life again in the old Macaulay mission. A fellow feeling makes us wondrous kind. Very few men ever strike Water Street who have not a shameful chapter or two in the story of their lives. Thus it comes about that when a man, who has at one time denied his Lord, comes back into His service, he finds it easier to start again in Water Street than almost anywhere else. No man is ever reviled or slighted because of his past. It is the present that counts, and the future. Macaulay mission men are bound to each other in a spiritual esprit de corps. Among them is one whose name is here withheld in the interest of others, not his own, but whose authentic story follows. To set down a record of one's prodigal years, broken vows and wasted, weary days, is, as it were, to put oneself in the pillory Yet, in view of all that has been done for me down in Water Street, it is a very little thing to do, after all. I am an Englishman, raised and educated in one of our most ancient cities. On my father's side I come of a line of Methodist preachers that stretches away back to Wesley himself. On my mother's, from the men who, since the days when they drew bow at Crecy and Agincourt, have been the backbone of the British race, the yeomen of England. My early years were uneventful enough, sheltered, guarded, peaceful. Nothing ever really happened in that quaint old walled city of my birth, with its story of 1,000 years. In it life moves but slowly, and the record of the halcyon days I spent in it, until I reached the age of 20, is just an ordinary, happy, everyday one, the record of a healthy, mischievous English college boy, blessed with ardent love of every kind of outdoor sport and game, and cursed with an extraordinary penchant for getting into innumerable scrapes of every imaginable kind. Friends hoped and believed that I should one day make some sort of a mark in the world. Father and mother prayed that their son might become a minister of Jesus Christ. I was born, bred, and nurtured in the traditions of the Methodist Church. Mother's cradle songs and lullabies were the old-time hymns of Zion. Nothing of example or precept was ever set before me in my home life but what was pure, lovely, and of good report. I had troops of friends whose influence, had I but heeded it, would have conferred on me incalculable benefit, for it was wholly cast on the side of truth and righteous living. Every encouragement was given me to seek and tread a path calculated to lead to some signal achievement, some high destiny. But I laughed it to scorn, went out from the old roof tree, and when I came to parting of the ways, chose the lower road. I knew of the right path, none better, of what it would mean, of whither it would lead. Yet I deliberately and perversely turned away, like Kipling's Mulvaney. I saw and knew the best, yet followed and did the worst. And so, on the very threshold of manhood, I began with careless abandon to form habits and associations that were one day to hold me fettered as with rings of steel. The next 10 years of my life passed rapidly enough, swished along in one wild whirl. I attained to considerable skill in several directions, which for years I followed with passing success in various parts of England. I always enjoyed splendid health, as most athletes do, and drank during the whole of those wander years whatever I thought fit, and as much of it as I pleased. Time and again I grew tired of a town or a job, and sought some other mode of livelihood. I turned my hand to newspaper and magazine work, to running a big vaudeville house in a Midland town, to managing a large saloon in the city of Manchester called the Blue Ball. And this time the tread of my life was downward, ever downward. My immediate friends were men of my own kidney, wild, careless, irresponsible prodigals, generous to a fault, but without a thought save for the passing hour. For most of them, poor boys, there had come a day of terrible reckoning. One after another they were flung away on life's wayside, self-robbed and self-slain. There were 8 of us in that little band of revelers. 2 alone survived, myself and one man now resident in St. Louis, Missouri. Of the rest, 1 died fighting in South Africa. The others, God help us, lie buried in suicides' graves. In the year 1900, God cried a halt. I had at this time left Manchester for London, and by the merest chance came under the influence of James Flanagan, the great South London slum missioner. At Eastertide, in this portentous year, one of my brothers came to spend a short vacation with me, and, as I had known for years that he had been sincerely and earnestly serving God, I questioned him as to which of the great London preachers he would like most to hear on the forthcoming Sunday. He declared for a preacher I did not know, whose name I had never heard. Indeed, I was not at all likely to have heard it, seeing that I had not attended a single religious service of any kind since coming to London, nor did I, on this particular occasion, have the slightest personal inclination to go, but simply suggested the arrangement out of courtesy to my brother, and in deference to what I knew would be the way in which he would like to spend his Sunday. So we went to church, my brother and I, and immediately I fell under the spell of a great Irish preacher. On that very first occasion of my hearing him preach, he succeeded in making me thoroughly miserable, showing me, as I had not hitherto seen it, what a prodigal I was, what a wreck I had made of my life, what a heap of useless human rubbish I had become. Unbeknown to my friends, yet utterly unable to keep away, I returned again and again on Sabbath evenings to this man's church, and came, finally, to where I had, perforce, to make a decision. I had either to cease going to services, for I could no longer continue to listen to this man's preaching and remain what I was, or give myself to Jesus Christ. I did the latter, and found pardon through the blood of the cross. With its more than 70 meetings a week, there is always plenty of work waiting to be done at this great mission center, and I at once flung myself wholeheartedly into its activities. To the next 8 years of my life, I now look back with pleasure and with poignant pain. There were 8 years of crowded, happy days spent in the service of Christ and humanity, yet destined to end in a night of bitterness far worse than death. Shortly after my conversion, the man who led me to Christ left to make a world tour. He was succeeded by one of the noblest men on all God's earth, by whose side I worked week in, week out, for 8 years in those awful, sin-smitten slums of southeast London. I became lay preacher and pleaded the case of the downtrodden, outcast poor, both on the lecture platform and in pulpits of the churches of my native land. I contributed hundreds of articles to the religious press of England, and in view of it all, I believe I can honestly lay claim, and that without the faintest suspicion of egotism, to 8 years of strenuous, successful labor spent in the service of Jesus Christ. But I fell, God help me, and the fall was as from heaven to hell. Not as a man falls over a sheer precipice did I reach the Gehenna, but by a gradual declension. To put it in a sentence, I was ruined by forming undesirable literary friendships and associations. I got to know quite intimately a number of literary men I ought never to have known at all. They were of the life I had left behind 8 years agone, and I knew it, but in my arrogant pride I imagined myself strong enough to be able to fraternize with these habitués of the Fleet Street taverns and still preserve inviolate my Christian integrity. Well, I was mistaken, blindly, utterly mistaken. I lost grip of Christ, became cold and lifeless in the very spiritual heart of me. Like the church of Sardis, I had a name as of one that lived, yet who was dead. I drifted lower and lower. I commenced to drink again. I who had not touched the cursed stuff for 8 long years. I severed my connection with my church, sold a magnificent library for a song, parted from my wife and little one, and went generally, unmistakably to the devil. Yet all this time an unceasing remorse was eating the very heart out of me. I believe I never slept for weeks. Through the influence of some friends, I obtained a position of greater lucrative value than I had ever held before. But I walked the streets of London a lost soul, enduring the tortures of the damned. Finally the whole thing became absolutely intolerable, and I determined to leave England for America, there to start life afresh. I came, but with me I brought the renegade heart, the apostate life. Immediately on reaching New York, I struck up acquaintances of a totally undesirable character, notably that of a one-time brilliant physician, but who, like myself, had lost himself. These were not the men whose friendship I should have sought. They could do nothing to help me. They could not help themselves, and so I did nothing towards winning my way back to the place whence I had fallen. I drifted about the states of New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, spending the money I had brought with me, getting lower and lower in the social scale, and rapidly qualifying for the lodging house and the gutter. And there I finally landed. On Tuesday, a day that witnessed the heaviest rainfall New York had experienced in 20 years, saw me, soaked to the skin, applying for admission at the Industrial Christian Alliance Home in Bleecker Street. I was admitted, and while in that institution, heard for the first time in this country of the Jerry McAuley Mission. Of course, I had heard of it when in England. As a mission worker, I could not easily have missed doing so. When Mr. Hadley's book, Down in Water Street, was published, I reviewed it for several prominent religious journals, but the whole matter had escaped me, and had not so much as crossed my mind since landing in this country. It was, however, brought back to me at the religious service, which is part of the weekly schedule of the Alliance Home. The speaker was Mr. George Hall, himself a convert of Water Street, who related his testimony with simple directness and telling effect. I decided to visit the mission, something I had often wished to be able to do in the days when I was engaged in similar work in the slums of southeast London. I had no thought or anticipation of its exercising a saving effect on myself. I was, if anything, harder, more embittered than before. But I went to Water Street, certainly not seeking temporal aid, for I had not the remotest idea that it could be obtained there. I had imagined the Macaulay mission was attending only to the spiritual needs of men, and I was certainly not seeking spiritual aid, for my heart was as if turned to stone. That meeting I shall never forget. Shall never, I trust, desire to forget. While sitting listening to the testimonies of the converts, there came upon me a rush of old memories that completely swept away my callous indifference to the things of God. My heart was stirred to its innermost depths, so much so that I could not resist the impulse that came upon me to stand up in my place and testify, not as the others were doing, to a newly found joy in Jesus Christ, but as one who, though once a child and servant of God, was then an utter castaway. I then hurried from the hall, intending never to visit it again. But God planned otherwise. Without knowing it, I was followed out into the street by one of the mission converts, Mr. Howard J. Thompson, a man who today is my dearest friend. Some considerable distance from Water Street, Mr. Thompson overtook and spoke me. He did not commit the tactical blunder of attempting to preach to me in the street about my obviously lost condition. He had a far better conception of the work he had undertaken than to do anything of that kind. He just began, kindly and sympathetically, to evince a friendly interest in my welfare. I suppose that, at first, I resented and endeavored to repulse my brother's kindly intentions. But he persisted with that patience which only a man with the love of God in his heart can exercise. Finally, he completely won my confidence, and 10 minutes later I found myself frankly telling him, an utter stranger, my whole wretched story. He invited me to visit the mission again. I did so, and yet a third time. During these days the Spirit of God was drawing me consciously nearer to himself. Touched by a loving hand, the loving hand of Howard Thompson, wakened by kindness, cords once broken began to vibrate again. On the occasion of my 4th visit to the mission I made the great, glad surrender. Christ spoke pardon to my weary, wandering heart. Since that hour I have tried to follow him, to be his child. At many times and in many things I have failed. It has been harder to do than I had imagined. I had wandered further away than I had ever dreamed. One thing, however, is certain. I have continued unto this hour. Avenues of service and usefulness have opened up for me, which by Christ's help I am trying to tread like a man. I pray God that he may ever give me the power of overcoming and the strength to hold fast that which I have, and see that no man take my crown. End of chapter 13. Chapter 15 of The Dry Dock of 1,000 Wrecks by Philip Elliott Roberts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15, Saved to the Uttermost. Wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost that come unto God by him. Hebrews 7, verse 25. The story which here follows is that of a cultured German who so completely lost himself here in New York as to become a mere barroom loafer, who wandered hungry, neglected, and rum-soaked about the Bowery and the Lower East Side until his life was that, almost, of a wild beast. To what depths of sheer depravity Reinhold Schultz sank is known only to himself. What is known, however, is that God has most marvelously raised him up to a level of good citizenship, righteous living, and fellowship with himself. While this wonderful trophy of redeeming grace walks the earth, no living man, amenable to the appeal of appreciable, tangible results, can reasonably doubt the power of God to save and keep even the vilest of the vile. I have interviewed this man many times, and his story, so full of tragedy and sorrow, can be authenticated in every detail. Perhaps it were best to let him tell his story in his own way, the story of his great, wonderful redemption. It is with a sense of shame and sorrow that I tell the story of my past life as a drunkard, but I shall be more than happy if this story will lead some other wretched drunkard to see how God can transform a man from being a curse to himself and to the world into being a blessing to his family. When a foreigner with a good education comes to this country to start a new life, lots of people imagine there must have been something wrong with him. It is not always the case by any means, but in my case it certainly was. I was born in Germany and had all the advantages a young man could desire. I graduated from the high school at 17 years of age and went to a university. I fought lots of duels as a student, and scars from these escapades are still visible on my face. After a time my father found out that I was doing little at the university but drink and dissipate. So he took me away and started me on a commercial career. For 3 years I was engaged as German and French correspondent in one of the largest forwarding houses in Russia. Later I came to Hamburg, and while in that city became identified with the socialist movement and attained to some prominence as a lecturer at the meeting of that party. By this time I had lost all faith in God. Rejecting and ridiculing the religion of Jesus Christ myself, I strove in my public utterances to induce other men to do the same, urging them to accept the theory that their only hope of social salvation lay in breaking away from churches and refusing to be hoodwinked by ministers and priests. For inciting to riot, I was seized by the authorities and imprisoned for 30 days. After finishing my sentence, I experienced a great revulsion of feeling for the ideals which had made my life, up to this point, an utter failure. I accordingly left Germany and came to America. I easily secured a good position, and after a while married a good woman who had known me since boyhood. For a year or so all went well, and I led a tolerably happy life. But domestic happiness did not last long, either for my wife or myself. In my native land I had drunk heavily of the strong German beer, and so, on coming to this country, commenced to drink the lager, brewed here in large quantities, but I found it weak and insipid compared with the European brand, and consequently began to drink whiskey. Before many months were over, this newly acquired appetite gained such a mastery over me as to goad me to do almost anything on earth to get liquor. Then began a period of wretchedness and undoing for this man, who, with a half-dozen qualifications, each one sufficiently valuable to have given him a respected position in society, did nothing with himself but drift utterly to the dogs. He lost position after position, went in business for himself, and of course dropped commercially to pieces. In less than a year from the time he began to drink whiskey, he had become a besotted, helpless drunk. His wife, hoping against hope, did everything a woman could do to save the man she loved from going down to ruin. Nothing, however, availed. The household furniture went, the home stripped of every stick and stone. Finally, the drunkard's wife left him, taking the children with her to Mount Vernon. There the poor, driven woman secured a position for herself, and an arrangement was effected with her husband, whereby he had access to his children for a few minutes one day each week. The little girl was sent to a street corner, where the father would wait to talk for just a few brief moments with the child he loved, yet whose home he had flung away for a still more dominating flame, the love of a fiery, soul-destroying liquor. Finally, the man's appearance became so utterly wretched and repulsive that the meetings were discontinued. I remember very well the last visit I made to Mount Vernon. He said to me one day. I stood for a moment on the corner of 4th Avenue and First Street before boarding a car for New York. I was all trembling and palsied with recent excesses, shivering like an aspen leaf. My little girl, whose home I had wrecked, stood with me, tears running down her cheeks like pearls. "Papa," she said to me, "every night I kneel down at my little bed and ask the dear Lord to send my papa home again. Yet as much as I love this little child, as God knows I did, I sank lower and lower. All my friends had now left me. I was unable to pay room rent any more. My clothes went to the pawn shop, and I finally drifted down to the Bowery, and my home was just any place where I could hang my hat, walking the streets night after night, or, when I had a nickel to buy a glass of rum, spending the hours between darkness and dawn in the back room of a saloon, with scarcely anything to eat for days at a stretch. My life became a perfect hell. On the afternoon of Thursday, March 30th, 1911, I sat half sober, half drunk, in the dirty little back room of a Bowery saloon. With greater force than at any time previously, I realized that afternoon that with not a cent to live on, with not a friend in the world, nor a place to sleep, I was nothing but a homeless, hopeless, drunken loafer. I came to the conclusion, too, that life was no longer worth living, and that the sooner I got out of it, the better for everybody concerned. With the intention of flinging myself into the river, I left the Bowery saloon and walked down through Roosevelt Street towards the East River. On the corner of Water Street my attention was attracted by a group of men standing together. One of them, seeing my wretched condition, asked me if I did not want to go into the Jerry McAuley Mission, which was only a very short distance away, and warm myself up. It was a bitter night, and I was suffering terribly from the cold. I had no underwear, and my clothes and shoes were all used up. So I accepted the invitation and staggered into the Mission, and I shall never forget the impression that bright, cheery room made upon me, coming as I did from the filthy Bowery saloon. I came in once into contact with men who stretched a hand of welcome out to me, who called my friend and brother, me an outcast, one whom everybody who knew him would rather see go than come. I told them my story, and they told me that sin was in my life which had brought me down to the gutter. I sat and listened, too, to a wonderful series of testimonies given by redeemed men, stories which were more wonderful than anything I had ever heard. Then the superintendent who led the meeting invited any who wanted to get away from their sinful, wretched existence, who wanted to lead a Christian life, to come forward and kneel down. I did as Mr. Wynford invited me to do, went forward and knelt down at a bench and cried unto Christ to save me and take that terrible appetite for liquor out of my life. I rose from my knees, a changed man. I cannot explain the change, yet I knew it had been effected. I felt as I had not done for years, brighter, happier, possessed of a great peace. This is a story of how Reinhold Schultz found pardon through Jesus Christ in the Water Street Mission. Showers of blessings have come his way since the night he knelt in penitence and prayer. He is no longer a forlorn, wandering outcast. He is a redeemed man, clothed and in his right mind. He has a position of trust today. He has his wife and little girl back, living with him. His home is the abode of love and harmony. No more wonderful instances of saving grace is to be found in all this broad continent than this one-time drunken outcast. His whole life, the way he lives it, is a magnificent proof of the efficacy of the salvation of Jesus Christ, a salvation that can save to the uttermost all who come to God through him. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of The Dry Dock of 1,000 Wrecks by Philip Elliot Roberts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15, Pilgrims of the Night. In the twilight and the evening, in the black and dark night. Proverbs 7, verse 9. One of the most remarkable phases of the work in Water Street is what may fittingly be called its unofficial ministry. By that I mean the personal work which individual converts feel constrained to do. Apart altogether from the regular activities of the mission, every man whose life story and testimony finds place in this book is engaged in it, as are 100 more. They call it getting out to help the other fellow. Remember the lost, helpless condition that once was theirs, knowing from bitter experience the sordid wretchedness of it all and how welcome a little material help is in times of stress and storm. These men go out, sometimes until 2 and 3 in the morning, endeavoring as far as their limited resources allowed to relieve the needs and suffering of the pilgrims of the night. In an endeavor to acquaint myself with some of the contributing causes of so much failure, I have often accompanied these good men on their errand of mercy, and chatted with hundreds of park benchers. Some talk readily enough, others are sullen and taciturn. One thing, however, I have found to be absolutely necessary in interviewing an average down and outer, namely, to prevent his imbibing the notion that you are amenable either to the blandishments of a highly sensational story or a prospective source of revenue. Once let him suspect that your charitable intentions may be enlarged by the recital of a weird, wonderful tale, and you may bid good-bye to the likelihood of obtaining anything of an authentic character, for he will straightway proceed to pitch a hair-raising yarn made up of 100 tragic happenings which have come to his notice in the course of a vagabond, knockabout life, but with little or nothing pertaining to himself in the whole sordid recital. But with no discernible advantage attendant on his pulling the long bow, he will in all probability content himself with telling his real-life story. I have listened to many such stories, sordid, tragic, pitiful, differing in detail, fundamentally the same, a dreary dirge of diverse tones. And I have ventured to bring together in this final chapter some of the fruit of my inquiries, and also to relate some authentic incidents that came to my notice while prosecuting them. They are illustrative of the lives of New York's down and outs, men who do not drink to any extent, or thieve, nor, in fact, do anything but drift, the flotsam and jetsam of life's tideway. As far as my experience goes, the men who find themselves wrecks of fair promise on the slope of the years are there from one or more of the following causes: perverse environment, simple error, unavoidable disaster, the machinations of an enemy, press circumstances, lack of opportunity, criminal misdeeds, unbridled appetite. Some have accepted the role of failure at the mere say-so of an employer, whose own credit was knocked to jam-rags within the ear. But whatever of tragedy marks the contributing cause of failure, nothing is half so tragic as the apparent sheer inability of so many poor fellows to come back. With some, the barrier preventing a return to better things is the bar of social relationship, the mistrust of their former contemporaries, or the edict of conventional pronouncement. With the majority, however, the real trouble is that, battered and discouraged, the man himself has lost heart and grip, and simply cannot come back. Just that. Heartache, regret, mortification, shame, bitterness, any or all of these have undermined his power of mental and physical resistance. When on rare occasions he has made it, his effort at rehabilitation has been weak, listless, never more than half-hearted. With pride, self-respect, and ambition gone, he has been content to drift, and when a man on the downgrade gives up the fight and just drifts, he is next door to done for. He is down to stay, not only down but out. Of course, in stating anything of this sort, one is prepared to meet with a criticism that it relates to the residuum, that something of the kind is unavoidable, inevitable, in a city like New York. Well, possibly it is, possibly not. But what all Christian men and women require should be pressed continually upon their attention is the fact that this residuum is all the time being fed from above. Every day some man or woman, boy or girl, slips through into the awful labyrinths of the giant city's underworld. It was a bitter night in February, and City Hall Park was deserted except by one lone man. By the light of a nearby arc lamp, I could make him out distinctly. He was not old, not a day more than 50. His old derby, greasy with one broken rim, was pulled down low onto his forehead. The nape of his skinny neck rested on the back of the seat. His face, yellow and livid, turned up towards the stars. His eyes were closed, and his mouth wide agape, showing 3 or 4 ugly gaps where the teeth were missing. His trousers, patched and mud-stained, were worn to shreds at the ankles. As he sat cross-legged, they had drawn away from the tops of his broken shoes to reveal 2 stockingless shins. The old Prince Albert coat he wore had the collar turned up and fastened at the neck with a huge safety pin. He had light brown, shaggy mustaches and a thin beard, through which the apple of his throat stuck out sharply. I walked on a few yards, then turned back. The man had not moved. Suddenly the thought flashed through me that possibly he might be dead. Starved-out creatures were being found lifeless in the parks right along. The eyes were still closely shut, the mouth still open. There was no discernible motion of breathing, no heaving of the narrow chest. I sat down on the bench near him and coughed slightly, but he did not stir. I laid my hand on his shoulder and said, "Hello there, brother." The man unclosed one eye and looked at me without moving his neck from the rail of the seat. The yellow, starved face with the gap-toothed mouth and one eye shut looked now more dead than it did a moment before with both eyes closed. "Cold night, isn't it?" I continued. "Who said it wasn't?" snarled my companion. "Don't you think I know about it, setting out here?" The gaping mouth closed at last. Still one eye remained with the lid glued to the cheek. "What did you go wake me for?" he began again. "It's hard enough to get snoozed off in this weather without being woke up for nothing. What do you want?" "Why, I thought I might help you somehow," I answered. "Are you ill?" "Paralyzed," the man answered laconically, touching his half left eye and running his right arm down his left side. "Can I do anything for you?" "Yes, if you've got the sense to do it. Look at it here, half of me's dead. The job for you to do is to clear out and let the other half die in peace." He rose painfully and slowly from the bench. "What did you go wake me up for?" he said again. "I didn't interfere with you. Why should you interfere with me?" "I have some food and shelter tickets here," I said, laying my hand on his shoulder. "Would you care to have one?" The wretched cripple eyed me suspiciously for a second or two. "What have I to do to get it?" he said. You generally have to go to a mission and pretend to be saved to get one of 'em. If that's your game, I don't want it." "There is only one condition attached to this, my brother," I made reply, "which is that you make use of it." "Oh, I'll do that, and be glad to." He held out his grimy hand, which looked like the claw of some unclean bird. I gave him the ticket, which he took sullenly, without a word of thanks. Then, with his hand thrust into the breast of his greasy coat, he moved slowly away in the direction of Park Row, dragging his paralyzed leg after him as he went. Surely his was a living death, a long drawn-out torture. As he passed the end of Frankfurt Street, a gust of night wind swept up from the Hudson, almost knocking him off his feet. He halted a moment, then bracing himself afresh, slouched miserably on. One sultry night in last July, I sat on a bench in Madison Square. The heat was stifling, not a capful of wind anywhere. I glanced at the man sitting next to me. He was a long, loosely built lump of a fellow, apparently about 20 years of age, fair-haired, and, as it turned out, a Scandinavian. "Been blazing hot today," I said by way of engaging him in conversation. "Yeah, something fierce," he replied. He spoke but very indifferent English. "Hot tonight, too. It's been hotter, though, this summer." "Yeah, I know. I've slept out 3 weeks." "3 weeks? Out here on the benches?" "Yeah." "Well," I said, "I don't suppose that has hurt you much after all. As a matter of fact, you're heaps better off here this weather than breathing in the rotten atmosphere of some overcrowded lodging house." "But how about eats?" "Eats?" "Yes, food. When did you eat last?" "Yesterday morning. None today." "That's too bad. Well, there's a lunchroom over there. We sat opposite 23rd Street. Perhaps we can attend to that trouble." "But surely there's an occasion for a great big fellow like you to be sleeping out, and going without food 2 and 3 days at a stretch. It's almost a dead certainty that you could get work of some sort if you really meant business." "Not with this." He held out his right arm. I gave a jump. His hand was missing, severed at the wrist. I looked at the poor fellow's mutilated member and saw by its red, raw ugliness that the injury was of recent date. My conscience smote me for having rallied him on his shiftlessness. "Forgive me," I blurted out. "No, you can't do much with that. How did it happen and where? Tell me about it." "I got it all mangled up in a paper cutting machine," he replied, "about 8 months ago." He gave me the name of the firm for whom he had worked. "Have they given you any compensation — any money, I mean, to cover up this fearful disablement?" The man shook his head. "While I was in the hospital a man came to see me and offered me $100. The nurses and doctors told me not to take it. Very properly, too. $100 for a man's hand. The pilfering thieves. But what has there been done since? Nothing. The people I work for have gone — bankrupt? Yeah, that's it. Busted up. Gone out of business." "Gone out of business? The Lord help him." "Well," I said lamely, "I guess there is somebody can be held liable yet, whom I don't know. But come along, let us go over to the lunchroom." After I had gotten him going at the lunch counter, I asked him whether he had any friends in New York. He shook his head. "How long is it since you came here from Europe?" 2 years. I came to this country with 2 others, but I don't know where they are now. They went to Pittsburgh a year ago." "Have you ever heard of the Legal Aid Society?" I asked him. No, he had never heard of it. "Well, it exists to assist such cases as yours." I wrote the address of the society on a card and handed it to him. "Go downtown in the morning and state your case to these people. In all probability they may be able to help you. I wish I could, but I can't. I'm only a poor man, with next to no influence. And take this other card. On it are 2 addresses. One is a Bowery lodging house, the other a restaurant. I'll arrange for you to have grub and a bed for a week. That is all I can do. Good night." As I bade him good bye, the poor fellow tried to kiss my hand. I snatched it away from him. "Don't do a silly thing like that," I said. "God help you and God bless you. I wish I could do more." With that I left him to finish his meal. Maimed for life, without money or friends, scarcely able to make himself understood, there he was, just a unit of that welter of misery and misfortune which goes to make up of New York's underworld. The usual compliment of outcast humanity occupied the park benches as I came through Union Square early one morning in September. I singled out a man who sat gazing moodily across the square, and proceeded to draw him into conversation. "Out of work, mister?" I began clumsily. "Think I'd be out here if I wasn't? I've not done a stroke for 6 months," he growled. Afterwards he grew more communicative. He was a house-smith by trade, he told me, and for more than a year had been told continually that he was too old. His age was 50. In the gloom of the night I had guessed him to be little more than 40. "While there's life, there's hope," I said, for lack of something better to say, at the same time feeling I was talking the most arrant nonsense. "While there's life, there's hunger, so far as my luck goes," retorted the old iron worker grimly. "But you haven't given up the idea of being able to work again some day, have you?" "There ain't much chance. Trade's fair rotten. Bosses don't want anybody just now. And when they're busy they tell me I'm too old, and that's pretty well true, I guess. I can't go up to any great height any more. I've always had a good character, but what difference does that make? I stand a worse chance of getting a living than the loafers who never did a square day's work in their lives. They're used to a game of this sort. I'm not." "Is your health pretty good?" "Not very. Chest trouble. To tell the truth, I haven't been much good since my old woman died. That'll be 3 years come next Christmas Day." "You mean your wife, I suppose? Sort of took the backbone out of you?" He nodded. "It sure did," he answered. Then his voice broke. "I've gone all to pieces since then. Poor old girl. We've weathered many a storm together. What's the time, boss?" he concluded, abruptly changing the subject. 20 minutes to 3. The old house-smith got up from his seat and commenced to move away. I detained him for a second, and he thanked me quietly. "Nights are not half bad in the summer. I can stand 'em all right so long as it don't rain," he said. "It's the winter nights that settle me. Well, good morning. It'll be sun up soon." He trudged off in the direction of 14th Street, a brave old fellow who deserved a better fate than that which had come to him. Yet his was a common heritage, the penalty of growing old. I walked over to the Broadway side of the park and sat down next to a man even more shabbily dressed than the one from whom I had just parted. He was far more willing to talk than the other, and I found out that he had followed a number of occupations. Some of the positions he claimed to have had were of a quite responsible kind. "Sort of a jack of all trades," I suggested. The man looked up. Despite a certain weakness, his face had a well-chiseled profile and a pair of quizzical eyes. "You may complete that old saw without fear of offense, my friend," he said with a grin, for judging from appearances, he spread out his hands deprecatingly. "I'm master of none." "Well, what seems to be the trouble?" "You're clever, aren't you?" "Fairly, but not sufficiently so. I should have done better with either more cleverness or less." "That's the trouble. I'm all right for ideas, quite a philosopher in fact, but I don't carry them out. I hate detail. I'm not cut out for manual labor, and I'm more than a trifle lazy. Now you have the whole story. Awkward facts, I grant you, but facts nevertheless. What are you doing out here?" "Well, at the moment when you did me the honor of joining me on this seat, I was watching those two fellows on that one opposite." "Why?" "Well, they appear to be going to beat it. That would leave sufficient room for me to stretch out if I can get across before some of my fellow boarders do." "Can you sleep out here in the open?" "Surest thing you know. All I want is a carte blanche with that seat. It's this infernal sitting that wearies me." "But sleeping out? You can't expect, that is, your condition," I blundered out. "Quite so. Pray don't spare me." He broke in understandingly. "No better worth, you would say, eh? Guess you're about right. Anyhow, it's my own fault, that I admit. I might have been in one of those swell hotels tonight," he went on, jerking his thumb in the direction of Broadway, "had I played my cards better. But there, what's the good of grumbling anyway? Not much, is it? Do you always get along in this fashion?" "Generally. I vary the program now and again by going to the Municipal Lodging House. There I get my clothes fumigated, indulge in the luxury of a bath, get a feed and a good sleep. And then? Why this. And when this is over?" He looked at me curiously. "The long sleep?" I suggested. He nodded. "Guess you're right, my friend. Got a cigarette?" he inquired carelessly. "No. Here's 10 cents. You can get one later. Or better still, some cake and coffee." "Thanks. I prefer the weed. I'll stroll as far as that lunch cart yonder and buy some." He yawned, rising from his seat and stretching himself. "You're my good Samaritan. My luck's not quite died out yet, apparently. Good morning." "Good morning." He sauntered off towards the lunch wagon that stands opposite the Metropolitan Tower, whistling softly as he went, a philosopher of the park bench, a cynic in rags. Outcasts of the city, who and what can work out their deliverance? Well, if this book has not failed utterly of its purpose, it has demonstrated that there is but one way. There is but one name, whereby such helplessness and apparent uselessness can be redeemed and reclaimed. He can save to the uttermost all who came to God through him. There is no ruined life beyond the light of heaven, and compensating grace for every loss is given. The Colosseum's shell is loved of flower and vine, and through its shattered rents the peaceful planets shine. End of chapter 15. Recording by Kurt Walton. End of The Dry Dock of 1,000 Wrecks by Philip Elliot Roberts.